so we're not disturbing anyone. We'll get ready for this great presentation. So this is the second time we're doing it. We did it for our 9th and 10th graders last period, and now you're going to have the same opportunity. All right, so today, very exciting, we have author Kara Thomas here. She is a Bellport High School graduate. Let's welcome her. Our Vice President, Ms. Ann Hayes, in the front over here. Thank you for coming. We had our President, Ms. Cheryl Police, and our Superintendent. They just had to sneak out to another meeting, but we thank them for attending today as well. All right, round of applause. All right, so without any further delay, we are going to turn it over to Ms. Oates, and she is going to take it from here.
Our Women's History Month Assembly with Ms. Kara Thomas. Ms. Kara Thomas is the award-winning author of 8 murder mystery novels. 8. Yes, that's all. She is also an accomplished TV writer. And as you can see up here, can you go back? She is a Bellport High School alumni. Ms. Thomas graduated from Bellport High School in 2008, so 15 years ago, she was sitting in the very same seats that you're sitting in today. Pretty impressive, right? So our assembly today is going to be centered around questions that you, our students, have written for Ms. Thomas. So if you have submitted a question, it is very likely that you may hear your question today, which is pretty neat. And we are going to kick it off from a question submitted by a student named Josias, who wonders how you would describe your time here at Bellport High School as a student.
I was kind of a dork. I was picked last in gym. I was not very athletic at all. I was sort of quiet, and I think that I'm just very grateful for like the teachers that like noticed like the quiet girl who liked to write. And yeah, I mean, I wrote for the variety shows. I wrote for the paper, and that's kind of where I really like. I always had loved to write, but when I was here, I really like had the environment and the support where I had teachers saying like, hey, maybe you should like consider a career where you write. So I'm very grateful for my time here. It felt very long at the time, but now that I look back, it was like such a blip. It went by really, really fast.
Thank you. Perfect timing, because Hannah, who's joining us now, is going to ask our next question. Here's a look at the covers of Ms. Thomas's published books. And Out of the Ashes, in the bottom right corner there, is being released on May 1st.
Help you succeed as a writer and get you to where you are today, and do you have any especially influential teachers along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here right today. I would not have even finished my first book if it wasn't for Ms. Hoffman, who wrote in my senior yearbook in the back. She said, I want a shout out in your first book. And at the time, like I had never even considered like writing an entire book. I'm like, that sounds like a lot of work. And I never really thought of being an author as a career. It was always something that like you had to get like really lucky to be like a published author. Like my dad told me like, oh, you can't study writing in college because you have a better chance of being struck by lightning than being a published author. And he actually asked me when I first got my first book contract, he was like, are you sure it's not a scam? So I was really lucky that like I had such supportive teachers who were telling me that like, no, you can pursue like a creative career. It is possible. And I don't think if I'd had those teachers like Mr. Ansipink, Ms. Emma, Ms. Hoffman, that really like recognized that like I was on to something, I guess. I don't think I really would have pursued it. I would have like stuff with going like pre-law and like, oh, I'm gonna make like a lot of money and be like a very serious lawyer, they kind of put the idea in my head that I could do something else.
So many of us are wondering, if you love reading, you love writing, and you want to publish a book, where do you start? How do you begin? And Audrey has a question that she'd like to ask on that topic.
Where did you start when you decided you wanted to write a novel, and how did you get your writing with it?
So I basically just sat down and started writing a book. There's no way to really like study for it. I didn't initially go to college thinking like, oh, I'm going to study creative writing. I went to college my first year. I actually studied history because I thought I was going to go to law school. And in my first year of college, like I was away at school. I found the pre-law super boring. I was like going to class with these like really serious kids that would like show up in a suit and a briefcase, and this is not for me. But I was kind of like locked in. I had to finish out the year, and then I could like change my major and figure out what I wanted to do. And I was just really miserable. And I had this like idea for a story for the past few years. It actually started as a short story in my senior year English class with Mr. Phobes, and like he wrote something like, "Oh, this would be a really good novel." So I just sat down one day and I started writing it. Like, spoiler, it was not a really good novel. It was a really crappy novel, and it never got published, luckily. But I just sat down and I just did it. I mean, there's no way to really like. I mean, you could read books on like how to write a book and like how to outline and stuff, but you really just have to keep going until you finish. And that book, like I tried to get that book published. I tried to find something called a literary agent. So you can't just like submit your book to a publisher. You need to find a literary agent first. That book, my first book, was not the one that eventually got me published. And what like got me a literary agent, I had to write another book, and I had to like be smarter about it and revise it and stuff to put it out there. But yeah, like my advice for anybody that like wants to write a book is like, as long as you have the idea and the motivation, you just have to like sit down and do a little bit every day, and eventually, even if you write a few pages a day, like in a couple months to a year, you'll have a complete book.
So it seems like the writing process is really a process. And lots of students have asked questions about how long it takes you to write a book, how long it takes you to publish a book once the first draft of the book is finished. So can you tell us a little bit more about that timeline?
Yeah, so now that I've been published and I'm like under contracts, I have deadlines, so I don't have a very long time to write a draft of a book. Like I'll get like maybe 3 or 4 months. So you really have to just like write quickly and worry about everything else later. So a lot of the process is just like vomiting out a draft, and then like I turn it to my editor, I get like her feedback, and then I have to go back in and like the hard work begins. Like I have to make everything make sense. Like the editor will be like, okay, like there's 1,000 plot holes in this book, and I'm like, can you just let me live? And then I have to like go back and actually make the book make sense. And sometimes it takes longer to revise the book. Like it'll take, maybe I'll write a draft in like 3 months, but like I'll encounter problems with revisions where there's just like so many plot holes, and I have to untangle everything, and then that'll take like another couple months. But generally, it like from start to finish, it'll take about 6 months. But then once like your book is done, there's a lot of waiting involved. Like you don't just like turn in a book and then like the next day it's published. Like sometimes there's up to a year in between because they have to proofread it and copy edit it. They have to like make a cover. They have to send out advanced copies for publicity and marketing purposes. So sometimes it'll like get to the point where I'll finish a book, and then 1.5 years will go by and it comes out, and then I have to go and talk about the book, and I'll forget the characters' names. I'll be like, wait, what happened on page whatever, because it is a very long process.
So it can really take years between finishing the first draft and then seeing it published. Wow. Okay, so our next question comes from a student named Olivia, and it's one that I'm eager to hear more about. The question is, what led you to write murder mysteries?
I don't remember always having such like a sick, twisted little brain. I think it could probably be traced back to like when I was a kid. I was an only child, so it was like you're gonna watch whatever mom and dad are watching, and they watched a lot of like Dateline, Law and Order. So I'm like 6 years old and like watching all these like murder mysteries and stuff. And like I was always just like very fascinated by the idea of crime and murder mysteries, and also just like the aspect of like reading a murder mystery, you kind of like play detective and you want to figure things out. I actually like went through a really long phase where I wanted to be a detective or an FBI agent, and then I looked on the FBI's website and you have to be able to do 100 pull-ups to be an FBI agent, and I can't do one pull-up. So I was like, okay, I guess that's not happening, so maybe I'll just like write about FBI agents and detectives and stuff. But I think like I'm drawn to murder mysteries and stuff because I tend to write about the things that like make me anxious or scare me. And I just remember as a kid like having this fear that like somebody was going to break into my house and murder me, probably because I watched like these age inappropriate shows about stuff like that. But I just remember telling my dad when I was like 6 years old that I was afraid like that we were going to be murdered, and he was like, "That's ridiculous. No, the stranger's not going to break into the house. You're more likely to be murdered by somebody that you know." So that was like kind of like put the idea in my head that I just wanted to like explore this idea that like you might not know the people around you. And yeah, I've always just found that idea like really compelling, that like you could be murdered by your best friend. Hopefully not. That's the plot of Little Monsters for you.
Okay, so there has been so much buzz in our building as students and staff have been reading Miss Thomas's books, and many people have asked about whether some of these books are set in Bellport. Are there connections to Bellport? So we'd love to hear more about that topic.
Yeah, so my most recent YA that weekend is actually the only book that is set on Long Island. The characters are from Long Island. They go on like this trip to the Catskills, but there is like a significant part of the book that is set on Long Island. And if you've read it, you probably noticed that the town is literally called Brookport. I thought I was really clever with that one. But that town was like loosely modeled after Bellport. I just wanted like the idea of like a small Long Island town where like everybody knows each other and everybody is like up in their business, each other's business. So that was like a big part of that weekend. A lot of people have also like thought that the town and the cheerleaders was based off of Bellport, and it actually wasn't. It was based off a real town in upstate New York called Dryden, but it does feel a little bit like Bellport just because it is like the small town where everybody knows each other. And I kind of like those settings for a murder mystery because it's like, do you really know the people in your town that you live with and go to school with and see every day? Or are they secretly a serial killer?
Okay, so now I'm going to pass the mic over to Tristan, who is going to ask a question about your time as a television writer, or I should say your career endeavors as a television writer.
Can you tell us more about your experience as a television writer and what motivated you to become a television writer?
So it was actually kind of an accident how I fell into writing for TV. I only wrote a pilot for one show, but back in 2012, my first book, Prep School Confidential, was optioned for a TV series by a producer, and he called me up and was like, "Would you like to write the screenplay yourself?" And they don't often ask authors to do that. They'll usually like hire an actual like professional screenwriter. And like I felt really special and cool, but I later found out that he asked me because they could pay me a lot less than they could pay like a professional screenwriter. But I was like, sure, I'll do it. So we like developed the idea for a first episode for Prep School Confidential as a TV series, and then like we went and we pitched it to all the TV networks, and we pitched it to the head of the CW network, and like he cut me off in the middle and was like, "Yeah, we're not going to make that as a TV show. Nobody wants to like. People are over Gossip Girl. We don't want to make a show about teenagers. You want to write something else for us?" And I was like, "Okay." It's like, what do you say to that? I was like, "Okay, sure." So I kind of like, I entered this like line script deal with Warner Brothers Television and the CW to develop a show for them. And it was called The Revengers. It actually was a romantic comedy, which is weird considering what I wound up writing, but that's just like the idea that they wanted me to write. And it was a very, very different process than writing a book. It was kind of like I had to write this script, and I had like 20 different people telling me what they wanted from it, and like sometimes they disagreed with each other, and it was just like a lot of writing and rewriting over months. And then the way that the TV world works is that the networks will order like a bunch of scripts, and then they pick like 3 that they want to film for actual to air on television. And of course, like they didn't pick mine, but it was still a really cool experience. I didn't like stay in the TV world writing because like part of the reason was I would have like had to move to LA, and I didn't really like LA at the time. There was a lot of traffic, and I got super car sick. And I was like, no, I'm gonna stay on the East Coast. And also, it's just when I write books, I have a lot more creative control. I can write the characters the way I want to, and not have like, I literally like had when I was writing for TV, like producers would go in and like rewrite my words, and like, I don't know, it was weird. Like one of them, it was like this old white guy. He was like, okay, this character needs to talk with more flavor. Like he didn't even say flavor, he spelled it like flavor. And I was like, okay, this is, I can't do this is weird. So TV writing is very, very different. But it was a good experience because screenwriting is so different than book writing. It's different skills. You become good at things like dialogue and stuff. So I'm glad I got to do it.
Do you hope that some of your books may be turned into movies in the future? Is that something on your horizon at all?
So every single one of my books, aside from The Darkest Corners, actually has been optioned for a TV series. And I've like gone down that road so many times where it's like, okay, we're gonna find a writer, but like the thing about the way that books to film works is that it's called as optioned, and then the studio has like a year or 2 to get it made. And then if they don't get it made, they have to like pay you a lot of money to keep the option. So many things like never really get across the finish line. The cheerleader, so like the 2 books of mine that are still in play, and they, like theoretically, like they're in development, is The Cheerleaders, and then Out of the Ashes, my first book for adults, is being developed for a TV series right now. Like they have a writer, they're getting close to like getting a director, but even when like you have a writer and director, it's like you have to, there's so many like steps to clear. And it was just such a weird process. Like I got personally ghosted by Anne Hathaway for Out of the Ashes. Like apparently Anne Hathaway like got a leaked manuscript of Out of the Ashes and like called my film agent and was like, I want to star in this, let's make it happen. And then like she wanted to like talk to me, and then like 2 weeks went by, and literally her agent called and was like, oh, Anne changed her mind about the material. So now Anne Hathaway is my mortal enemy. You can tweet about that, it's fine. She knows we have a
Oh my goodness, where do you go from there? Well, a question that's on my mind has to do with the creative process and writer's block. A lot of students have submitted questions having to do with that topic. So do you ever struggle with writer's block? Is there some part of the writing process that's really challenging for you? How do you deal with these things? What advice might you have for students who love to write, want to write, but just get stuck sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, writer's block is totally normal, and I think it's actually become worse for me. Like 8 books in, I get writer's block now, more now than I ever did. I think like my first book was the easiest to write because I didn't really like understand the misery ahead of like your editor being like, okay, rewrite this from scratch. So a lot of writer's block, I think, is just that like voice in your head, like your inner critic saying like, well, what's the point of writing when your editor is going to make you rewrite the draft anyway? Or maybe it is your first book and you're like, what's the point of this? It's never going to get published. I don't know how it's going to end, so I should just quit. A lot of like busting through that is really just like diagnosing the problem. Like sometimes I'll just be stuck and I'll realize it's because like I really like screwed up somewhere in the beginning, like something like maybe a like twist in the plot happened too early, and it just like, it's not making sense what I'm trying to do, and then I have to kind of like go back and tinker with things and fix things to move forward. Or sometimes it's just like a mental block where I'm just like really burned out and maybe I'm not meant to write that day. I mean, like, I don't agree. A lot of people say like, oh, if you want to be a writer, you have to write every day. And I think that's like garbage. If you don't write every day, like sometimes I'll go a week without writing because I'm just like, I wrote all these chapters and then I'm like burned out, and like the idea of looking at them and trying to fix it like gives me that mental block. And sometimes the way to just like push through that is just to do something else for a little while. Because not all writing is actually just like sitting at the computer and getting words out. Like a lot of it involves like thinking about the book and like trying to untangle like all the plot threads in your head, or even just like picking up like somebody else's book and reading kind of just to like clear your brain a little bit.
So we've heard that you love to listen to true crime podcasts, and can you tell us a little bit more about the research that goes into your writing, how your podcast obsession contributes to things, what kinds of research you do?
A lot of like the research is like a type of Googling that would probably like put me on an FBI watch list, like where is the best place to hide a body on Long Island, like stuff like that. It's just a lot of it is you want, for me a lot of research is setting, because I'm not always setting like the story in like an area I'm familiar with. Like my next book for adults, a lot of it occurs on like, it's like a murder that happens on Dune Road in the Hamptons, and like, I don't live on Dune Road, I'm not a millionaire, so I don't really know what it's like, so I need to like delve into that world a little bit, like maybe I need to like go on a drive and like see the landmarks so I can get everything right. And then some of it is like the more in-depth research where it's not like a particular topic, but like listening to a true crime podcast and like hearing how like cops and detectives like talk about stuff, because like if I'm writing like a character who's like a detective, I want like his dialogue to feel realistic. So a lot of that is just like listening and absorbing. Yeah, and like watching like Netflix documentaries, like that all counts as research. Yeah.
Okay, I know that we have lots of questions among our students and staff in the audience. So who would like to kick it off with a question from the audience? Mr. Buttress.
Sure. As people are thinking of theirs, I have a question also. Because I remember I had a conversation with you when you were a student. I asked if you were Turkish, because your maiden name is Turkish. So, is it your father's Turkish? And is he from Turkey?
Buckle up, because there have been some developments on that side. So yeah, my dad's name is Turkish, and my father and my grandmother, like their family, they're actually from the island of Cyprus, which is half Greek and half Turkish. And they immigrated here when my dad was 2 years old. So like they spoke Turkish, like Turkish last name, Turkish cuisine, like culturally Turkish. And like for years, my grandmother hated the Greeks and Italians because they were like enemies or whatever. So she like talked mad crap about the Greeks. After my grandmother died, my dad wanted to do one of those like DNA test things, and he did. And shocker, it came back like 50% Greek, 40% Italian, and like this much Turkish. So it turns out that I am not that Turkish, despite like the ridiculously Turkish last name. And if my grandmother was alive for that moment, to find out that she was Greek and Italian, I really don't know what would have happened. It would have been so ugly. But yeah, so does that answer your question?
Well, actually, I wasn't even going to ask that question.
Oh, not even your question?
No, that's even better. And it could relate to this next one, which is, would you ever consider trying to base a future novel maybe in Cyprus or something like that? Because it sounds like you get a lot of conflicts that could be built into that. That could be really interesting.
Well, that sounds more like your wheelhouse of history, because I'm going to admit that like I don't really know anything about my people. Like someday maybe go there and do research. I think a lot of people like ask me what genre would you never write, and I gotta say historical fiction, just because it is like there is so much research involved, and it like makes my head hurt like thinking of the details and like how they would talk, and it's like no, they would wear like that type of shoes in 1490.
All right, so no,
Yeah.
but fascinating, I love it. Does anybody have a question? Raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic. Okay, there's one. Okay.
Alright, so you said that you decided to sign with a contractor for like writing. Why didn't you ever try self-editing? Like getting yourself published?
Oh yeah, okay, so that is definitely a path that a lot of people go down. I knew I wanted to go the traditional route because like the big thing about self-publishing, it's really hard to get your book out there. So like bookstores will only stock books from like the major publishers. So if you're a self-published author, you can't get your book into a bookstore unless you like really hustle and like introduce yourself and like try to like get the bookstore owner to have your book on the shelf. A lot of it, I basically like wanted somebody to handle all that for me. When you're self-published, you have to like hire somebody to design your own book cover. You have to hire like somebody to like proofread your book. And I just knew I didn't want to do all of that. I think there's like certain genres that it's like you actually can make more money self-publishing. Like if you write like romance is very popular like online and ebook and stuff. So if like somebody went that route, you actually can make a lot more money because you're not like, you don't have to pay your publisher back what you got paid in the advance. You're just getting all the proceeds from the book. The way that it works with the traditional publisher, and I've worked with a few, like most recently my YA publisher is Penguin Random House. You get paid up front for the book, and then once they make their money back on the book, they start paying you royalties. So the publisher, a lot of people are like, oh, why would you do that? Because you're giving the publisher like such a big cut of it. But it's really hard to sell books if you don't have the publisher behind you to do like the publicity and marketing. So like, for example, my publisher, I have a publicist who sends out like review copies of the books to like all the like magazines and stuff. So really that's how people hear about books. With self-publishing, it's kind of like you have to be like your own marketer online. You have to be like really social media savvy to sell your own books, and I'm not. Like, I can't even take like a centered Instagram photo. My social media is so bad. Like, I need to like hire like a college student or something to manage my social media because my pictures are so bad. So I just knew that like self-publishing wasn't really like the appropriate route for me, but it definitely is for some people, especially like if you are like more business minded and you kind of want to be your own publisher.
Question for Ms. Korean.
Your books are so good. Thank you so much for coming. I just was wondering, in terms of the cheerleaders and some of the characters were from Hamilton College, which I went to, and what particularly was it the setting itself that chose Hamilton College to have some of those?
Yeah, so that was, I mean, the book is set in upstate New York, so I was kind of like looking at the private colleges within like the proximity of where like the fictional town was set, and I was trying to think like where would like a preppy guy who was good at sports like go to college in this area, and like I think there were two, there was Hamilton, I think Colgate is another college up there, and I kind of just like randomly picked Hamilton, but that's very cool. You're the first person that I met that like actually has a connection there to that.
We're getting close to the end. I just wanted to mention something unrelated to Kara, but you might be interesting. Because Kara is a very successful novelist as a Bellport High School graduate. But it's Women's History Month, and I just heard yesterday that Cadence Howard, she's not here, right? Cadence Howard committed to wrestle at East Stroudsburg State. She's not our first female wrestler, but she would be the first female wrestler in Bellport history to commit to wrestling in college. That's really exciting.
So I think that is a great segue to something I want to mention. As we think think about what Ms. Thomas has achieved as a Bellport High School alum and what Cadence is going on to pursue, I would like all of you to take a moment to think about how you will apply your unique, valuable skills and talents in the future, and what could you come back and share as a Bellport High School alumni at some point in the future. So hold on to that thought, work towards those goals, know that you're surrounded by teachers and staff members who are here to help you with that. So, round of applause. Before the bell rings, let's give Ms. Thomas a huge round of applause.
High school librarian on my
Okay, so I believe we have some special dismissal instructions here. Ms.